Okay, hello everybody. It's bang on 12 o'clock, so we're ready for our next theme. So I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Geraldine Dowling. Geraldine is a lecturer in the Faculty of Science and is one of our UDL working group committee members as well. So Geraldine is going to introduce the following theme, which is learning through COVID-19, flipping the classroom using UDL. So over to you, Geraldine.
Niamh, thank you very much and welcome everybody. It's fantastic to be with you here this morning. So our first speaker that we're going to have in this theme is Dr. Ailish Breen. She's also a lecturer here in IT Sligo. And it will follow the same format as this morning. So we'll have an 8-minute presentation and then there'll be 5 minutes for questions. So I'd like to welcome Ailish. And we're very much looking forward to your presentation, Elish.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Thanks, Elish.
Share my screen. Okay.
That's fabulous, Elish. We can see your screen.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the title of the session is Flipping the Classroom. And I think over the last 15 months, I've really had to reflect on what other learner needs we need to think about and what other acrobatics we've needed to do, like backflipping and maybe somersault in the classroom. So to just give my module some context, I'm teaching a year 3 level 7 class, and the module I teach is medical device technologies. My students sometimes transfer in from other courses and other colleges, and they're a very diverse grouping. So in year 3, it's almost like year 1 in that they're kind of starting out again. A number of years ago, I started to upload content to YouTube. So now I have nearly, 80% of my content is on my own YouTube channel. And I provide links to the students week by week on their Moodle page as to what videos I want them to watch. And then they do a short quiz after watching the videos. So this is the flipped learning that I would have done in the past in the real classroom. Students would come into class then, and we would do in-class activities like post-it exercises, flip chart exercises, and we might read some papers. If the paper is quite technical, then I get them to read it in pairs, and they might turn to the person next to them and try to explain to them what they've just learned. So what I have found is that students like this for a few weeks, and then, I find I'm getting blank faces after a week or two. And then as the semester rolls on, there might even be a little bit of eye rolling and yawning, and they're thinking, is she still asking us, have we watched these videos? Because evidently we haven't. And I'm trying to keep motivating them. So I've pondered how to optimize flipped learning. But along came this pandemic that we're all in, and I had to refocus, as I said at the start, and start thinking about learner needs a little bit more closely. And what I really pondered here was Maslow's hierarchy of needs and human motivation. And, Maslow theorized that in order for this higher order brain activity and learning to happen up here at the top of the pyramid, that we needed to fulfill more basic needs of physiological safety and belonging needs. And I think we'll agree that our students have become isolated from their peer network, their friends, their family. They're in a very uncertain time. And in some cases, in my class at least, they are lacking in basic physiological needs. So I kind of focused in on these lower rungs in the pyramid in order to see could we get back up there. And then some clever person on the internet put the meme up that Wi-Fi underpins all of these needs. So I went back to backflipping, but with the idea in mind that I would focus in on these key words here that are in this circle, like belonging, empathy, laughter, conversation, fun, peer networked and shared collaboration. I have my students for 3 hours a week. So for one of those hours, I told them that they needed to watch the pre-recorded content on their own. I could be available on Teams, but they were watching it on their own. But the 2-hour session I had with them, then I expected lots of active engagement. We did lots of breakout rooms and a little bit of fun, like embedding a comedy clip into a lecture, that type of stuff. So this is an example of some of the stuff that we did in class. This is a mind map that I would have created using Moodle Mind Map. The class fed into it. So they would have typed maybe into the chat box things that they'd learned from my videos, and we created this mind map. And the great thing about the online learning, doing it online, is that you can just save that immediately to Moodle, and it's a screenshot for them to have then and to go back over. So this is an example of what the students would have created themselves in groups in breakout rooms. And they were pretty basic at first, you know, at the start of semester. They were just piling information down on the page. But again, based on maybe stuff they'd watched in the videos or things I'd asked them to read in breakout rooms in class. And again, you know, the great part is that we could save all these screenshots off and then put them in a folder on Moodle. And as the semester advanced, and this is an example for semester 2 for the same group of students, they got really good, at putting all of that information together and categorizing information into nice mind maps. So I had the same group of students then for a new module in semester 2, and this is called Advanced Therapy Medicinal Products. In this case, I had them for 3 hours on a Friday morning. And so, you know, the end of the week, everybody's tired. It's a long session. And I think it's probably pertinent to say, you know, January, February 2021 was a pretty bleak time for everybody, if we remember what was happening in the country. And the students were suffering. So again, I, you know, thought, you know, we're going to have a little bit of fun here and a little bit of active conversation. What I really focused in on was in-class assessments to try and take the load off them and make the assessment meaningful. So I planned 2 in-class assessments, and this is an example of what one group would have been given. So they would have been asked to research a topic within the session, prepare some PowerPoint slides, and then present back to the class at the end of the session. The somersaulting aspect, so why I'm calling it somersaulting, is that I stitched all of their presentations together and I presented it back to them the following week as one lecture slide deck with a central theme. And they had, in essence, then created their own lecture content, and this was on Moodle as their own lecture content. So they were really pleased to see it being presented back. The second in-class assessment then was a mixture of flipped and somersaulting. So they would have had some content here to pre-watch in advance of the session. When they came into the session, they were given their project brief, and it was based on real clinical trial data that was available. So they had to do a little bit of problem solving, get information together. And in this case, they recorded group presentations and sent the link for the recording to me. So, and again, that fed into lecture content. You know, the outcomes and feedback, what I really enjoyed was seeing the students becoming more comfortable speaking in teams, abandoning the chat function and getting comfortable speaking with each other and getting to know each other. They got very good at reading papers, dissecting information and sharing information. And they definitely used multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression.
1 minute.
Okay, so when I think about these key words that I set out to achieve within the class, I was really pleased to see that the students identified a lot of that themselves. And this is student feedback here in blue. You know, they mentioned the active conversation, the freedom of choice they had. They liked the YouTube videos and the quizzes. They enjoy talking in groups while having a task. They found it very beneficial. They felt more involved when they had to do a task together. I really like this quote. It wasn't so beneficial on discussing the topic, but I enjoyed time on chatting on random things. This was also beneficial, and I think this was very important. But they saw things from different perspectives, and ultimately, you know, in terms of the group assignment here, but I would hope for the whole module, they found it challenging but fun. and I learned loads learning with a group of people. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Ailish, thank you very much for that presentation. I can see just how much work you put into that strategy, and it was really, really something that was great work, and definitely sounded like in the time of the pandemic, the students had, well, fun. And I see that some of the comments in the chat relate back to that. It's actually great to see the word fun being brought into the classroom around, online teaching. A couple of questions I have for you. In terms of the challenges that you encountered when you delivered this module outside of Wi-Fi, could you talk to us a little bit about those challenges when you were introducing the flipped learning?
So flipped learning in the online environment, so I mentioned flipped learning in the traditional environment that, to sustain the student motivation can be difficult to watch them. So, it was equally as valid in the online environment, but I think once the students realized that every week they were going to come in, there was going to be breakout rooms, and there was going to be an expectation that they interacted with their peers, they got on board with it. And I think they actually, in the pandemic, I think the flipped content worked better. They liked having something to go back over, to be able to, that the videos were there and that they could watch them again if they didn't catch them first time round. So I definitely felt it worked better than in the real classroom, where maybe in the real classroom they expected me just to go in and deliver it again to them. As I said, a little bit of eye rolling and, no, we haven't watched the videos. Can you just tell us? Whereas in this format, they were more engaged, and as we progressed, as I said, they turned off their microphones, they stopped typing, and some of them turned off their cameras, which was major for the students because they don't turn on their cameras.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'd agree. I saw that myself in my own teaching, that it made a huge difference to them when we gave them video material. The amount of times that they watched it, which really, I suppose, shouldn't have surprised me, but it really did.
Yeah.
So, Ailish, thank you for that. I know that you're a recipient of the UDL Digital Badge, and I just wondered, would you recommend obtaining that UDL Digital Badge to your colleagues?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a fantastic way to do it, and as several speakers mentioned already, it's a lot of it people are doing in their practice anyway, but it just changes your mindset a little bit and to think about it a little bit more. So, when you're putting an assignment up, you kind of think to yourself, okay, is there going to be a barrier here? If I ask them to write an essay, is that going to pose a barrier to some students? And, what do I actually want them to show me? And if I want them to show me knowledge of the topic, well, then they can present a video or a voice file or a graphic, a mind map. It doesn't have to be an essay. So it really just flips your mindset that you're thinking that way all the time. I think that's the biggest thing I got from the badge, is that I'm thinking that in that frame of mind. I'm thinking of barriers to learning.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to look at the chat box and just see if there's any questions, Ailish. I've noted that a colleague has mentioned that it'd be really interesting to see the analytics behind the videos, because it would add some further insight to the excellent work that you just described.
Okay.
So that's some compliments, and others have mentioned, the student-centered approach that you used was really, really, really excellent, and thank you for that presentation. And I'm just going to monitor, and bear with me, the other chat box. Apologies, just have to make sure that we haven't missed any questions. Yeah, I think I've covered them all. So with that, I think we have run out of time. So I just want to thank you very, very much, Ailish, for your very, very interesting presentation.
Thanks, Geraldine, and thanks to all the other speakers. I'm learning so much today. It's been excellent.
Yes, thank you. Likewise.
Okay.
So now I'm going to pass over to my next colleague, which is Jennifer Gilligan. Jennifer is also a member of staff in IT Sligo and a instructional designer. So we'll follow again the same format, which will be 8 minutes for this presentation and 5 minutes for questions. So I'm going to pass you over to Jennifer now. And Jennifer, we can see your screen, so you're good to go. So Jennifer, I can see your title slide.
Jennifer, you just muted.
Can you hear me?
No. Yeah, I can hear you perfectly now.
Okay, brilliant. Sorry, everyone.
Not at all. Don't worry. Thank you.
So, hi, everyone. I'm going to be discussing my observations during emergency remote teaching and how Moodle page design and a good review process can put an OR into UDL. So OR standing for reviewing what we're currently doing, what is working well, and what we may wish to retain and build upon in the future. So as an instructional designer, I have the opportunity to work closely with lecturers and to assist them in using technology to teach. But the pandemic has obviously changed our interactions, where previously they were face-to-face, and now we too demonstrate and train fully online. So as an instructional designer working during COVID, much of my work has been to help lecturers using technology to create content, helping them with their Moodle pages, providing templates for best practice, looking at alternative assessment and new and innovative ways to enhance teaching and learning. During emergency remote teaching, we've really seen a focus shift to students' access to education, flexibility to their situation, and a shift from synchronous to asynchronous activities. Given the limited time to get content online during the pandemic, we've seen an amazing transition for both staff and students in the use of technology and an emergence of a broader community of practice through our staff forum. This forum networks staff across all disciplines and help them to communicate shared ideas and solutions to technology issues. We noted a change in the use of technology, where previously communication occurred mainly through email. Now checking in and out and confirming understanding started occurring increasingly through our VLE and live video chat. A change in the type of technology also occurred. For example, the use of Teams and Microsoft apps, and our level of interaction across multiple apps and platforms outside of our VLE Moodle. But one of the other things that came out of the pandemic was obviously a greater understanding of our vulnerabilities and the importance of connections and positive outcomes of some of the changes we made for our students. One of my observations during this time was the change in the types of queries that we were receiving from staff, from the initial queries regarding communicating with students en masse or simply uploading content into Moodle pages. Staff now wished to use technology for better engagement and interaction with their students. I've seen the types of questions change from simply, we need help, to where do we start, to we want to review, and an interest in improving Moodle pages and harnessing the VLE for the obvious advantages it would bring to teaching and learning. But interestingly, we now see a growth in the communities of practice between emergency remote teaching staff and staff who are running intentionally planned online learning. Best practice for online instruction is key in helping staff to design and review Moodle pages. So we use the 6 learning types of Diana Laurillard's conversational framework. We combined this framework with the ABC toolkit for curriculum design and instructional design principles. But more recently, we started to see the overlap of these best practices with UDL principles, along with the advantages that technology can bring to the whole design methodology. We have put all of this together into a Moodle page called Moodle Designer, which is available to staff and run as a workshop. It gives staff a framework to review their Moodle pages and make changes in manageable chunks in their own time, or even recognise where they are already implementing good design in teaching and learning. All of our best practices, like UDL principles, keep students' needs to the forefront. And this overlap with UDL is a work in progress, which we are currently undertaking in greater detail. Shkelly et al. Tells us that all students, including those with disabilities, can benefit from a course designed with UDL principles because there are less barriers in place. Accommodations are made for students who register with our Access Office, but many of our students do not disclose their needs. UDL plans for flexibility from the start and recognises that students have different preferences, capabilities and constraints. By considering this in our reviews of Moodle page designs, we can be proactive rather than reactive to the needs of our students, and this can be even more cost and time effective, moving away from adapting materials to designing them with flexibility in mind. If we look at the research paper, Learning from COVID-19, it gave us examples of how UDL was implemented during emergency remote teaching, simply through well-designed content or alternative assessment design. So rote design, one primary mode of representation, and large assignments at the end of the semester were replaced with written or recorded self-reflections, concepts and representations using audio, video and text and images, and smaller sections of projects due throughout the semester, with the final part of assessment reflecting on the students' application of feedback and development of knowledge. So what are we already doing and what should we continue to do? So in essence, we have flipped the classroom during COVID. We've been using forums for group work and content discussion. We're using demonstrations and practice through presentations, mind mapping, videos, uploading of slides in advance of class, captioning in Teams, e-portfolios, reflective journals, quizzes, audio feedback, open book exams, and recording lectures which can be speeded up or slowed down. We're using breakout rooms, virtual chat, and all of this is done through our technology. So Moodle Designer provides staff with basic design elements, a description, a question, and an implementation and Moodle tool, and then linking up with all the training resources we already have in Moodle. We will be improving this resource with the UDL overlapping. So now we have a plan of action in improving this resource. We want to learn from and continue any adaptations or innovations that were beneficial during COVID lockdowns, so that we can improve and continue teaching practice, even if we return to the classroom. We know, in summary, that all of our students can benefit from using good design principles, including UDL. We have an amazing amount of work already done, and that needs to be reflected upon.
1 minute.
Okay. Our flexibility gives students choices and enables them to engage. The overlap between good design, UDL, and technology needs to be explored further. Demystifying the role of technology in enhancing our teaching and learning can be done through shared ideas and resources. We have seen an amazing transition for both staff and students in the use of technology and an emergence of a broader community of practice. We know that UDL is achievable through sharing of ideas and these good practices. And now may be a good time to reflect on all the amazing work done during a very difficult time by putting the R into UDL. Thank you very much.
So thank you very, very much, Jennifer, for your presentation. It was compelling, but it was also visually stunning. So thank you. So I'm going to have a look in the chat box first and just have a look at some of the questions that have popped in to make sure I don't miss any. somebody mentioned that they thought that the sentiment should continue to adopt the tactics developed in ERT. And Jennifer, they asked, what do you think you see as the main barriers to doing this?
Probably time is a big one, but I suppose COVID has shown us how we can accelerate given an exceptional circumstance. It wasn't an ideal way to start adapting materials and putting our resources quickly online. But I think now we have the opportunity to step back, and maybe the resources that we put up initially, we can even look back now that we may have a little bit more time and breathing space. Even during the summer months, I know we all want to do other things, but sometimes when we are away from our students and we do get a little bit of headspace, it's the time to look at making sort of manageable improvements. So time is always going to be a factor. So I suppose it's about focusing on manageable chunks and see what we can improve on one step at a time.
Excellent. And following on from my comments about your compelling visualizations, there's been lots of comments in the chat box about the graphics in your presentation, so you should be commended for that. You talked a little bit about the Moodle Design resource or the Moodle Designer resource. Where would we find that in Moodle? Where could staff find it?
So our staff can search for it in the search bar of Moodle. So when you log into Moodle and go to the home page, there's a little search bar at the top. So if you type in Moodle Designer there, it'll bring you straight into it. And I can put a link into the chat box as well. And I just want to say just about the graphics, like Natalie earlier today or this morning in her presentation, I want to thank Tamsin Cavallero, because I too took part in the graphic facilitation course, and it has really, it has given me new enthusiasm for the resources that I already have and improving those with visuals. And I'm actually going to look at all my resources over the summer too and see, one or two that I know I can improve on using graphics.
Well, like a comment here in the chat box, I agree completely. They state, the instructional designers in all of our institutions have been a fantastic resource to all of us, really helping us all in our roles here in our institutions to try and, deliver the best service that we can. So we've had a couple of comments around that in the chat box also. And then, the module designer workshops, when do they take place?
So we run them 3 times a year. So we run one in September, we run another one at Christmas or in January, and then we've just ran another one. So it's probably a good time to jump in, at the end of the year. We will run another one at the end of the semester again, just so that people have ideas going forward maybe for the next semester, and you don't want to be starting a design review in September. So whichever time of the year suits you, or you can, think about it, even just come to the workshop and just keep in mind what you could possibly do. And of course, the resource is there all the time because it's a Moodle. So it is also a self-service in that you can go in yourself and check your own Moodle page yourself using the resource.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you very, very much. In the interests of time, I would have loads more questions for you, but I think we need to stop here. I would like to thank you, Jennifer and Ailish, for a really great session. And I'm going to pass us over now to our next chair, which is Mccann. And Mairead is a lecturer in the School of Business and Social Sciences.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for the introduction. And just to say, everyone is very welcome now to the next session as we continue to climb our UDL ladder throughout the day. And this session, the theme is authentic student experience. And we're going to continue to showcase some wonderful approaches to UDL, teaching approaches. And our 2 presenters for this session include, first of all, a colleague from GMIT, Dr. Pauline Logue, and following that we have Dr. Jared McGranaghan from IT Sligo. So of course you're probably familiar with the format from earlier, where each presenter will have 8 minutes to present their presentation, and then we'll have a follow-up Q&A session. So please continue to pop in the questions in the Q&A box, and obviously any feedback there in the chat stream is very welcome as well. So our first speaker is Dr. Pauline Logue, and interestingly, Pauline's background is in teacher education, so very much in terms of reflective practice, as we've been hearing through the day as well. So I'm just going to invite Pauline now to share her screen, and we can check that everything is ready then to go at that point. Thank you, Pauline.
Share here.
So it's sharing, the slides are on the screen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get,
I can hear you.
The slideshow start from the beginning.
Perfect.
I'm just going to move up to, I'm just going to display my settings now correctly.
Yep.
How is that for you?
That's
lovely.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Mairead, and I'm delighted to be here with you all today, and it's been a wonderful learning experience so far. So the title of my presentation is Celebrating Inclusion and Diversity in the Classroom. We're having a little glitch now in terms of moving the slide on, so just bear with me. There we are. So I'm going to first of all give a little bit of the context of our explorations of UDL in our teacher education program. And I'm going to particularly focus on school placement modules in the context of a pilot exploratory action research study. I will share some of the redesigned activities that we engaged in, myself and students, and address a few challenges arising and end with 3 recommendations arising out of our study. So I work in GMIT in initial teacher education in the Department of Creative Education. We have pre-service technical teachers that are training in construction studies and design and communication graphics for second level teaching. I'm fortunate to work with those students in years 3 and 4 for their school placement, but I also teach them their educational theory subjects in years 3 and 4. So there's a beautiful connection then between theory and practice that works very, very well. So in my theory classes in prior years, the students had already been introduced to universal design for learning principles. And in this year, in our school placement module, the students themselves came up with multiple means of engagement, representation, and actions. They broke out into their chats, they broke out into their breakout rooms, they had peer conversations, and they came up with strategies that they felt could work. And just to point out that it was quite the year for us this year because our students were not able to go into the schools in real terms. So they had to have a crash course in online teaching, and they had to go and teach in their schools nationally using online means. So it was a huge learning curve for them. And, you know, we were delighted that they were willing, even despite that challenge, to take UDL on board in a way that they hadn't before. And they were really, really positive about it. So here were the redesigned activities that we explored together. And it was very discursive and conversational with the students. The students developed planning grids for school placement, and these are schemes of work for 8 or 10 weeks of delivery, quite detailed, as we'll see. So they redesigned the planning grids, they redesigned their PowerPoints. We also, for the first time, introduced a very short reflection worksheet specifically on UDL to raise awareness and to help each individual student to consider how best they could implement UDL on placement. Coming up to placement, we pinned it down from speculation to reflection to action plans. And they shared each of them their 5-point action plan commitment. They also, many of them, reflected during school placement and shared their reflections on our Moodle forum. And finally, we made one short adjustment to the SP assessment rubric, and that actually had quite a lot of impact, as we'll see. So here's an example of a planning grid that our students developed. This is by Michal Walsh, our fourth year student, and he developed a transition year unit with the Galway Hooker model making model. So here he has the Galway Hooker scaled down, and he also linked it to local Connemara heritage. In the screen grab here, you'll see that there is quite a piece of alignment to do for the planning grids. They have to align the curriculum, with the learning outcomes, learning intentions, teaching methodologies, success criteria, assessment methods, and numbers, things like literacy, oracy. And this year we added UDL. So here's a third year example from Jillian Spindler, and these are with permission, by the way. She took her planning grid, which was quite detailed, and she revisited it from the lens of UDL. And she took the color coding from CAST and applied that in an intentional way right through her scheme of work. So in that way, she was able to be alert week on week as to how she might implement it and where. All of the students redesigned their PowerPoints. And I have one of our wonderful educational technologists, Anne-Marie Burke in GMIT, to thank for her support and help, helping me and helping our students to reconsider and critique our PowerPoints and move them, from a dependence on text in some cases to, more variety and multimedia PowerPoints. So this is one example from Corey Killeen in year 3. She introduced much more visuals from real world contexts. She introduced infographics and simple tables. She looked at the aesthetics, consistent design across her PowerPoints, the font, background, embedding videos, embedding links, etc. Midway through our process, and we were training these students for about 8 weeks before they went to the schools, midway through, we took pause and stopped, and we began to reflect, well, what do we think UDL is now actually at this point? I really needed feedback myself to understand how students perceived UDL. We were on the journey together. I'm quite the newbie to this. I just this year completed the fantastic digital badge courses, which were wonderful. And this was very exploratory for myself as well. So we went on a journey together, the students and I. And they shared what they thought universal design for learning was, and they also shared where they thought they might apply it in their practice. And very close to going out then, they pinned it down to really a contract with themselves, a 5-point action plan, a commitment of 5 things they would do to promote UDL when they were out with the children in schools. Here's Philip in year 4, and he committed to using the flipped classroom for peer teaching, and using YouTube videos for the sequential learners, helping students to have choices around the design features in their wood projects, allowing them to communicate in multiple means, and enhancing his own PowerPoints so that they were animated. This was almost an afterthought, and it became quite significant. We added one new area onto the assessment rubric for school
1 minute,
placement.
please.
Thank you, great. So we added UDL into the assessment rubric. And we gathered data as we went using various MS Teams, questionnaires, worksheets, and Moodle reflections. The students, as you can see in the chat reflections, were really looking at students as individual learners. They were naming the fact they were already using UDL and had now a language for it, and the learning was more engaging. They were providing more options, thinking about accessibility, and allowing more choice around the display of information by their learners. 2 main challenges were the time demands of redesigning resources, and also the inconsistent approach to assessment by our tutors and myself across the program when it came to UDL. Finally, 3 recommendations are to implement UDL across the 4 years of the program, not just the final 2. And this is already happening, but to do it in a systematic, planned way. to provide staff training for placement lecturers and tutors for consistent approach to UDL assessment, and to design an action research iteration 2 for the next academic year. So a huge thank you to the National Forum and to AHEAD, to Dara and Trevor and Lisa for a fantastic programme. For Laura, a wonderful mentor in GMIT, a great support. Anne-Marie, who assisted me with the PowerPoint redesigns. Cormac and Orla, my triad partners. The wonderful pre-service teachers that went on the journey, and a fantastic conference planning team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And again, a very rich presentation with a lot of detail and, you know, that wonderful shared experience that we're getting, particularly, I suppose, in the context of teacher education. So that immersive UDL practice that you presented to us. So again, I can see there are, again, very positive comments coming in here in the chat in terms of commending the approach that you've taken, and very much, I suppose, how you've presented in detail the process and the feedback that you've received. So in terms of the questions, and again, just switching between our chat boxes again, just to make sure I'm capturing the questions as well. But just the theme being on authentic student experience, Pauline, but just in the terms there about from that quite rich source of student feedback, how do you hope or intend to further develop UDL awareness within your programme?
Well, again, with the authentic and different in two ways, both in the context of the teacher education programme itself. I would see these students coming up and being the pioneers and being the peer teachers and the mentors for the cohorts coming along. And we have a mentoring program in our 4th year, so they take the reins, and I go to move back, and they become the leaders in this space. So that's one way where they can have a real impact, but also the authenticity, the authentic learning in the real world, the impact on the schools themselves. And Dara said at one point, and this came up earlier today, I think with Jennifer, that, take one step at a time and really push that and do it well. So, we took the step and we were also talking at that time about impact, what impact can you have? So when I was deciding about my UDL activities, I chose this cohort because I thought, wow, they can have amazing impact, because I totted it up. They worked with 3,000 children across the country this year alone. So if they were applying, a few of these elements, then hopefully that can have a positive impact. So that's where the authenticity came in for me in the way that I was approaching it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite amazing when you capture that reach, the students as ambassadors for UDL, and in terms of carrying the practice into their own practice, and how that ripples outwards. But also, yes, the sound of advice there in terms of one step at a time in terms of our own practice and how we can embed UDL also in that way. I suppose one other point, and it links back to the discussion, I think a question earlier in the day, how do you think the students came to understand the distinction between UDL and differentiated teaching and learning?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because it's one that comes up for us. And, over the years, we've focused an awful lot on teacher education, on differentiated learning. And that's necessary because they have to develop individual education plans for learners, and that, may need different approach or may have particular needs. So there has been strong emphasis on that on teacher education. And again, I want to thank Laura Hegarty, our own mentor, who pointed me in the direction of Katie Novak, who talks about the distinction as a teacher-centered planning approach for the students, for the differentiated learning, and then for the UDL, it's more the focus on the students being empowered to own their learning, have flexibility and choice. I've been doing some reading on that, and I think it's actually more complex in terms of the overlaps than I might have thought originally, and certainly need to look at those distinctions more clearly. But my students found it particularly helpful to have that simple distinction made, and where they knew what they were doing at each time and not confusing both issues up. So we're still on a journey to understanding that, because there are overlaps.
No, that is very interesting, and in terms of that engagement from the students and the feedback, how that informs that as well. And I see there are a few comments coming in relation to that as well. Just one there. So true. IEPs are still very important. So some feedback there that we'll capture in the chat for you as well, Pauline.
Thank you, Marie.
Which will be useful as well. So thank you very much
Thank you
for sharing with us today.
Pleasure.
So thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to move now to our next presenter, Dr. Jared McGranaghan, who again is a colleague here in IT Sligo in the Faculty of Engineering and Design. So Jared, I'd asked you to share your screen, and we'll check we're all.
All right, Maria, thanks very much for the introduction. Can everyone hear me and see that screen okay?
Yes, that's working perfectly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Jared McGranaghan. I'm a lecturer in mechanical engineering here in IT Sligo, and my talk today is on home experiments that will enhance student experiential learning in mechanical engineering. So this presentation is going to discuss two home experiments. Whoops, there's something here in my way. I can't read my slide. Now, this presentation discusses two home experiments devised for Year 4 students in mechanical engineering. One in analysing a fin for heat transfer, and the other to investigate corrosion behaviour of metals using simple materials and common household chemicals. So when you're teaching fin theory to students, most of them aren't really, find it quite difficult to find out what's going on and all these, the variables that are involved. So I wanted to do something that was quite practical in that regard. Likewise with stress corrosion, it was going to come up in one of the modules I was teaching. And I thought this would, if they were able to investigate something practically, this would give them a very good stead later on. So in the UDL task that I did before Christmas in the UDL course, I noticed that some aspects of the coursework can be formulaic, even in practical laboratory classes, where we're just instructing the students and they're kind of often learning by rote. So I wanted them to do something that was more investigative. This quote by Kate et al. Stood out to me in the course as well. Engineering does not assign learning to standalone subject areas, and that engineers use subject knowledge, understanding, and other skills along with tools to solve problems. So if you're a mechanical engineer, that doesn't mean that you're just going to be stuck in mechanical engineering. You're going to have to cast the net a bit wider and maybe draw from other fields of science, mathematics, and other engineering bodies, and not just limited to that either. So I wanted to encourage investigation of knowledge rather than retransmission via report. And this also provided another method of engagement from the UDL method, in addition to labs and lectures, which may suit more independent learners. To increase student involvement and improve authenticity, I introduced these simple experiments for both modules, and I hope to encourage more self-led investigation and observation of phenomena, which is going to draw more parallels between physical and theoretical aspects. So the position within the UDL framework, we had the to provide the multiple means of engagement. The second was to provide multiple means of representation, and the third pillar is multiple means of action and expression. So we're in the first section, and that is in recruiting interest. And then we're the second one in there, which is optimize relevance, value, and authenticity. So that's the student can say to themselves, why should I bother learning this? Actually, this might be quite useful. So individuals, the UDL rationale, individuals are engaged by information and activities that are relevant and valuable to their interests and goals. So this doesn't necessarily mean that the situation has to be equivalent to real life, as fiction can be just as engaging, but it does have to be relevant and authentic to learners. So individuals are rarely interested in information, in activities that have no relevance or value. And I'm sure that's a question that a lot of engineering lecturers have heard. Why do we need to learn this? So from that, then, my intention was to optimize relevance, value, and authenticity, and also to demonstrate that relevance through authentic, meaningful activities. So in the UDL rationale, again, in the classroom, just as a reiteration, the delivered modules, the students are accustomed to continual assessment exercises in very conventional forms reports, mock exams, things like that, and I wanted to move away from that. So I introduced these self-led investigative learning in 2 modules with these home-based experiments on stress corrosion and effectiveness of cooling fins. So previous student experience of a stress corrosion test in the Open University, I had previously carried that out in an Open University course, and I was able to apply that to the module Engineering Materials Analysis. And a Google search provided me of some simple options at the correct level of Year 4 on fins, and that was the one that I decided to utilize. So I'm going to explain those now. So the fin experiment first, that was got from the paper here by Latif M. Ligi et al. in the City University of New York. And for the stress corrosion experiment, this was drawn from my previous experience in an Open University course where one of the modules was called Failure of Stress Material, and a section of that was Stress Corrosion in Materials. So I had to go and prepare the materials, and so for the fin experiment, I got mild steel strips and I got some aluminium strips, and I got them cut in the workshop. And I also got one of the technicians to order in maybe about 400 brass rings. These are just simple plumbing rings. And I also got the students to buy some ammonia. So I want to thank the technical staff in the Department of Engineering. So for the guidelines for the experiments, I literally took this one from the net. So that's Latif's paper. I added another little experiment onto it, and I gave that to the students. And I found later that I actually needed to do a lot more work, that I had presented it as a fait accompli, and I needed to do a little bit more work, but that's in hindsight. With the stress corrosion, I was able to give much more detail. And I drew out 2 sheets on preparation and on actual testing. And then let's report back on the student activities. So here they are preparing their samples. They had to put a bend in them. Some of them laid out what they were going to do, how they were going to measure. Bending them here, prepping them, getting the experiments all set up. Now we heated them, so they dropped them in the pan of boiling water. So it's 100 degrees at one end. And at the other end, we're not sure what the temperature is. So there they're all getting heated. So we get a look at who's got nice kitchens. So they measure then, so some of the students were able to go out and get thermometers and measure then the temperatures. And the original way of this experiment was not to use equipment, but to use your thumb just or your finger, and at that end there would be 37 degrees, and you just measure the length of that. They reported then on their errors and on how close it was to theory. And now we're going on now to the stress analysis. So they got the brass rings, so they had to introduce stresses in them. So they had to give them a little squeeze with pliers. They annealed some of them to remove stresses. And now we tossed them into some ammonia and left them there for a few weeks. So you can see them all going through their different setups in the jam jars with the ammonia. And they tested them as well. So we got coat hangers, we got milk cartons, we got all sorts of things in here for testing these. And even one guy was in his work and got a very advanced setup for it. And then they compared. So we looked at stressed and unstressed. And I know I'm approaching the end of my time here, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. So the student feedback, for the thermal experiments, the students got to experience difference in thermal conduction between 2 materials. And they were able to see that there was a reasonable confluence, a prediction between theory and practice in there. And they also, all the students got back to me and found that the aluminium piece was too short. So that was a good practical learning. With the stress corrosion, there was some surprise at the simplicity of the test and the speed of deterioration in the jam jars when ammonia was present. Especially
1 minute.
Thank you. Especially the degree of deterioration in stress samples. And there was a line here that I liked from one of the students, and I felt that this paragraph here, this student had really absorbed what was going on in the test, and I was pleased with that. And there's another little bit of feedback here. At this point, the hanger gave in and broke, and that made me realize, what have I got to do to this student to make him realize that that we're not dependent on instructions here, and that we should try and overcome this, not just base the whole stress corrosion experiment on the strength of a clothes hanger, which isn't really the point of the whole thing. So I'm going to have to try and figure out how to address that. Areas needing attention. I think we were caught with COVID, we were caught with the slower delivery of class, and I think the thermal experiment needed greater in-class support. A lot of variation how the students prepared the stress rings, and a lot of scatter in the results. Future recommendations: refine the guidelines, provide a better intro for them and indicative answers to make sure they're on the right track, and conduct the tests earlier in the semester, because some of these went late and went over into January and we didn't get to meet up again. So I think I've optimized the relevance, the value and authenticity, demonstrated that relevance through authentic, meaningful activities have hopefully led to an enduring understanding. And I think here now, if we go back to Kate's line, engineer doesn't assign learning to standalone subject areas, and that engineers use subject knowledge, understanding and other skills. But I think now that we've educated the students into learning more about this subject knowledge, giving them actual subject knowledge, and developing their skills in understanding, so that if they come up against similar problems again in their engineering careers, they will be armed with the toolkit of how to go about solving these. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jared, for that. So again, another very interesting example of UDL in practice, and I see a few comments coming in terms of particularly noting it's great to see the showcasing of engineering in practice. And I thought it was interesting there, you mentioned about getting to see the kitchens, and I see a few comments noting about the potential smells in the kitchen with the ammonia and the different experiments that were actually happening in practice. So some very interesting questions there. So I'm going to come to the first question that's come in there from our colleague in IT Sligo, Dr. Perry Sher. So Perry's asked you, Jared, how influential was your Open University experience in the development of your home experiments, and what do you think are the important things that could be learned from the Open University approach?
Yeah, the Open University approach was something that I really look back on fondly, and they did achieve high awards for the effectiveness of their engineering education. So I was trying to bring little snippets of that into IT Sligo, especially in the pandemic terms when we weren't able to bring the students into class. Certainly would need to be refined a little bit more, Perry, from my end, especially in the testing. The Open University, as well as sending us out the brass rings, sent us out the ammonia, they also sent us out a small testing kit, and that I wasn't able to provide. So I was getting the students to construct their own testing kits. So I think we had some shortcomings in that regards, because as you can see from one of the lines, the coat hanger broke, therefore he wasn't able to test the rings. So I think we'd need a little bit of refinement in that regard. And I see another line there about health and safety. Yeah, definitely. Ammonia, it is household ammonia, so it's available in hardware stores. And I told them to be careful with it, to keep lids on the jam jars, keep it out of reach, and boiling water. Yeah, there is. Yeah.
So but
they're engineers. They should be able to handle hot water, I hope.
Yeah, it's I suppose authentic experience in terms of the experiments. So there were interesting comments coming through there, Jared. And I suppose just coming back to our theme about the authentic student experience, what was the feedback or the uptake from students in terms of engagement in this?
Uptake seemed to be generally positive from anyone that I spoke to or that had provided feedback. The uptake was about 60% for the thermodynamics out of, so about 60%, and it was slightly lower for the stress corrosion. And I think I'd have something to learn in that regard, that I should assign it a higher mark. And I think a lot of students also, despite repeated reminders, left it till the very end and realized that this was going to take them weeks to carry out. The chemical process of deterioration was going to take a long time, and I think as people left things into Christmas and rolled into January for extended deadlines, I think they dropped some of the experiments, so that led to lower uptake of the stress corrosion one.
Okay, which is it's interesting feedback in and of itself. So, and it feeds in, I suppose, to the content there in your presentation in terms of the advice to others considering such approach as well. So thank you very much for your time there, Jared. And again, very positive comments coming in there, particularly from the engineering perspective there as well. So thank you for that. I suppose the good news. You're welcome. And the good news I get to deliver now is it's lunchtime, and just to encourage everyone to continue to put in feedback in the chat and in the Q&A. We'll be reconvening at 1:40, so 20 minutes to 2. And I hope people take the chance to enjoy some of the sunshine. It's sunny here in the northwest. I hope it's the same elsewhere. And continue to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn and all the other platforms. And we'll see you back at 1:40. Thank you very much.